Well, let's say it happened to me. It was a little different. I didn't know how to do anything. Let's get clear about that. I was moved through the different pranayamas, and actually they did themselves to me, or the Kundalini did it to me.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Sivana family. Welcome back. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for all the love you give the show. Today, we're demystifying Shaktipat, which is the transmission of Kundalini energy from teacher to student. Here to speak with us about this today is Gabriel Cousens. He is the author of 14 internationally acclaimed books. He's known worldwide as a spiritual teacher and the leading expert in live plant source nutrition. He's a holistic physician, psychiatrist, family therapist, and cutting-edge researcher on healing diabetes naturally. He holds an MD from Columbia Medical School, a doctorate in homeopathy, and diplomas in Ayurveda, clinical acupuncture, and holistic medicine. He's an ordained rabbi, an acknowledged yogi, and a 4-year Native American sun dancer. So he's going to be speaking to us about his Kundalini awakening as well. We'll be covering what is Shaktipat, what role does it play in the process of liberation, and how is it transmitted from teacher to student. If awakening Kundalini energy or having a big Kundalini awakening is something you're interested in, something you seek, do not miss this week's episode. Our guest's knowledge on the topic of Kundalini energy is vast, so get ready to be inspired. Before we dive in, I just want to remind you of how you can support the show, how you can keep these interviews coming to you. The first way is to leave a rating or review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. And the second way is to make a purchase on SivanaSpirit.com. If you meditate, Sivana Spirit has everything you need to enhance your meditation practice. Some of the products that I love are the mala beads, the singing bowls. There's also statues and incense that you can purchase to make your space truly sacred, and of course also support the podcast as well. Use the discount code podcast30 for 30% off your first order. And now let's dive in to this week's conversation. Gabriel, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. I think the best way for us to start our conversation is to talk about what Shaktipat is. What does it have to do with awakening and transcendence? I think there's a lot of confusion around what Shaktipat means. What is it that it is, and what is it that you're doing?
Well, Brett, that's a really good question. So Shaktipat is a tradition that goes back to the time of Shiva, 8,000 years ago. And just in case people don't know it, Shiva was a real person. He was probably the first animal rights leader in the world or in history. And he started the whole tradition, which is the key to my yogic tradition. So it goes back 8,000 years, the best we can tell. What is it? It's the transmission of the awakening energy from generation to generation. That's kind of an overview. Now, to be more specific, because things have changed now. So then it was the guru touches the chief disciple, and they now carry the energy. It's been passed on. And the truth is, it's in every tradition. As I write in my book, Spiritual Nutrition and the Rainbow Diet and Liberation, you can find this transmission of energy in almost every tradition.
So it's the transmission of energy from a teacher to a student. Is that a simple way to look at it?
It's a simple way, and it's in the context I'm talking about. We are talking all the way back to the actual living person called Shiva, and that transmission over 8,000 years. Now, what does it do? Well, in the context I'm talking about, it is about the awakening of the Kundalini energy. So one way I like to talk about it is the descent of grace. that awakens the Kundalini energy. The awakening of the Kundalini energy is considered the next, and I'm going to say the final step in the liberation process. So some of the great teachers like Ramakrishna, for example, said, it's only when the Kundalini is awakened, I'm paraphrasing, is when the spiritual life begins. Muktananda was my guru, said the same thing, approximately the same thing. So it's an understanding that we can do yoga, the yoga asana, we can do pranayama, we can do different things, but only when this energy is awakened does the final phase of the spiritual path to enlightenment begin. So that's the context, and it's an important context to understand. Then the other part of that is that there's a whole unfolding process. Now, I was very blessed to receive this awakening energy from Swami Muktananda in 1975. And I'll give you a little feeling for what happened, because then you can understand the power of it. There are probably 2,000 people in the room. Quite frankly, I didn't know much about the whole tradition, but I've been studying Kundalini a little bit, and I met with Swami Muktananda. He said, you should come to intensive, then you'll understand. So when he came to me, he actually blew into my mouth, and his physical prana went into me. Now I'm going to footnote and say Shaktipat can be transmitted by look, by touch, which is what most people think about, and by breath, and actually by sound. And I literally I have been directed by Muktananda to be a vehicle for the Shaktipat. So I will give it over the video to students in Brazil, for example, and they'll have Kundalini awakenings just by look, by eyes, actually is what we're talking about. It's the eyes, and also by sound. So you have the 4 different ways. So he blew into my mouth, and it's like, that was a surprise. Nobody told me that was going to happen.
And Gabriel, did he do this during a meditation? Were you seated in meditation when this happened?
Yes, I'm sorry. We were all sitting for an hour meditation, and he was going around giving the touch, which is the usual way he would do it.
And what does the touch look like? Can you describe that for people?
Perfect. Good question. For him, it was 2 ways. At the beginning stages, before there were thousands of people, he would actually physically touch you, usually in the third eye area. Okay. Later, he began using peacock feathers to touch people because there was just so many people. So that's the true, the usual way he did it. Now, the breath, that's a rarity, and I had no idea that was going to happen, but he blew his prana more directly into me, and I could feel the energy going down, and then it reached the base of my spine, where basically the Kundalini is stored below the base chakra. I'm not going to get too technical for people, but below the base chakra, and there was just this explosion, and then it began to move throughout my whole body, activating all the chakras. Now, when I mean activating, I literally saw, and I didn't know this prior, this is important, I saw all the petals of all the different chakras. It's like, what is this? And each chakra has a different set of petals. And so I saw it, and I also saw the energies associated with each petal. And then as it began to move up, it came to the third eye, and then kind of exploded in the crown chakra and kind of went above me. And then suddenly this other figure appeared, which turned out, which I didn't know, was his guru, Nityananda. As he looked down at me, and this is another piece, you can receive Shaktipat from people who have already left their bodies. So he looked down at me, then I had another explosion of energy, and my whole crown chakra lit up. And again, footnote, I was very new at all this. Like, this is way beyond my imagination, okay? And with each chakra, there's a certain amount of consciousness that was released. For me, I had another question. In my life, a lot of people in my family died, and I was looking for the answer of what this is all about, death. And somewhere in that process, a little voice rang out and said, there is no death for the self. On that, answer my questions that I had as a teenager, as a 16-year-old, when my older brother was killed in a car accident. It's like, oh, there's no death for the self. And that was what I call an apperception, not an intellectual understanding. So I'm sharing another piece is that many deep understandings come once the Kundalini is awakening. And that's important. It isn't just you have this experience, but your levels of consciousness are awakened. Now, on the external plane, I developed a rash, lasted 2 weeks, that literally went from the base of my spine, went back and forth across my spine like a serpent, ending in the left side of my neck. And both hands became red and blistered. So there's a lot of heat with Kundalini too, because it's opening you up to the cosmic energetic flow. And for me, it was pushing me to my very limits of what energy I can hold. And so this, as I said, this, which my friend Dr. Lee Sinella wrote the book Kundalini and Transcendence, he said that was just clear stigmata. So in the Christian world, we talk about the stigmata people have. I was experiencing stigmata. So this is just an idea of what goes on with the Kundalini, and it is fire. Okay, it's very hot. It can be. So that was the initial. Okay, so I had outer stigmata, and I had inner experiences, really receiving the mystical understandings of each chakra, and literally, as I say, seeing the petals. And it was a little subtle, because at the heart chakra, I saw 8 petals. And later, I looked up, and I said, there should be 12 petals. What happened here? And then looked up further, and that there is normally the 12 petals, but inside the 12 petals are the 8 mystical petals. So what I'm saying is real mystical understanding of who we are on a subtle plane is revealed to people. That's, I think, the most important thing to kind of understand what I'm saying here. So this one Shaktipat, where he blew his prana into me, awakened on multiple levels with multiple, in a sense, mystical insights to stigmata going the full length of my spine. So that was it was a very full awakening. So that gives you an idea a little bit of what can happen. And then it continued. 2 weeks later, I received Shaktipat again, and I didn't have any experience with pranayama. I spent 1 hour in intensive pranayama doing every single pranayama that I've since learned about, naturally and spontaneously, without any prior knowledge. And that's a little bit where I began to understand that the practices of pranayama and really yoga asana may have come, this is just a theory, actually coming from people who've had their Kundalini awaken, and it can awaken spontaneously from years of meditation and so forth. The easiest way is Shaktipat, which is the descent of grace from another person to yourself. It can also, women at birth actually have a few cases, or at least 1 or 2 cases of women having a Kundalini awakening, giving birth. They're different things, but classically speaking, it's by look, by touch, by sound, and by breath. So all this is, as I say, going on, and I'm led through all the pranayamas that you can possibly imagine, way more than I even knew about. I didn't know about any to begin with. And I also had what I can call a certain amount of kriyavati, where I was moved through, and this is like, there's thousands of people, but other people, they're all in meditation, where you move through certain yoga asanas. So my theory is it's possible when people have the Kundalini awaken spontaneously or through through their guru, spiritual teacher, thousands of years ago, they spontaneously went through a variety of yoga asanas, which are designed to actually help awaken the Kundalini. And I'm going to say differently, designed to help move the flow of the Kundalini. So you move into certain positions that accelerate the unfolding and opening up the channels. Technically, we talk about 72,000 nadis, which are the subtle channels. And again, I don't want to get too technical here, but three main ones, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. And so the yoga asanas come spontaneously to move the energy through the 72,000 nadis, and particularly the main three. So then people saw that, again, this is my theory, and then began copying it, hoping that if they copied it, then they would have the Kundalini awaken.
So what you're saying is the people who were originally doing the asanas in your theory were people who were awakened, and that was just the energy spontaneously moving through them.
Exactly, which we call kriyavati, which is what happens. I was moved through some, other people were moved through other yoga asanas. I was moved through all the, every possible pranayama we can possibly think of that I've researched up, and it was all spontaneous.
Right. So it wasn't like he said, okay, this is how you do alternate nostril breathing. It was just a transmission. You just knew how to do all these pranayama techniques immediately, and you were just doing them.
Well, let's say it happened to me. Mm-hmm. It's a little different. I didn't know how to do anything. Let's get clear about that. I was moved through the different pranayamas, and actually they did themselves to me, or the Kundalini did it to me. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. And Gabriel, what was your relationship with your teacher at this point? Were you and he talking?
I met him once.
You didn't know him at all?
I really had no personal relationship whatsoever with him. Yes, I met him, and he said, yes, you want to learn about it, come to an intensive. So I actually didn't know much about him or anything. Except.
And were you asking him questions and talking about what happened? I was just saying, did you ask him questions? Were you guys talking about what happened or not? No.
No. Remember, it's a room with maybe at least 1,000 people.
Right.
One of the people there. And he did what he did. Now, on the other side of it, I have a little feeling how it works, in that when I'm involving the transmission of this energy, based on his direction, I just kind of flow and I do whatever I'm guided to do. So I don't think he was thinking about it per se, but I'm guided to do this or do that, or touch here or touch to the top of the head, or do you follow what I'm saying? So the Kundalini is moving, the cosmic Kundalini, and I'll explain a little bit more about Kundalini in a moment. And you are, being that person, are literally guided to help awaken it in people in different ways. And basically it's touching the forehead, but it could be, touching the back of the head. It could, simple things. It could be doing the breath, as I mentioned, but you're just simply guided. And so for me, the cosmic energy is running through, and I'm just guided to where it goes. And I'm just the tool at the end of the line through how it's flowing. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. And I think this is a big question for people listening, because, for example, and I feel like on the show I always just use myself as an example, but I might right now I'm doing a 40-day Kriya, right? It actually is focused on Kundalini awakening, this particular sequence. So I'm doing this work on my own as a solo yoga practitioner, right? Now, at what point, so I guess my question is, for someone who's doing, whether it's Kundalini yoga or a certain type of meditation at home that's, again, designed to awaken Kundalini energy, that's why they're doing it. Is it really working, or do they need someone to do Shaktipat in order to have an awakening? Because, for example, when I do this Kriya in the morning, I obviously feel way better after I did it than before. It ends with a third eye meditation, and I feel great. But it's not the kind of experience that you just described, right? Which was with the stigmata and, all this heat and, it was much, much subtler. So for those of us that are practicing at home or are doing some things, we think we're raising Kundalini energy at home through doing yoga. A, are we? Are we actually raising Kundalini? And B, do we actually need to take this step of getting involved with the teacher to get a transmission if we want to experience this for real? I hope my question makes sense.
Your question makes total sense. Mostly using it to yoga asana hasn't proven to be very successful. I started with Dr. Lee Snow, the Kundalini Crisis Clinic. Kundalini would awaken spontaneously in people. And the main people who are coming were people who actually are very, very heavy meditators. And I don't remember anyone who was just doing yoga asana. Okay, so people were meditating hours a day. They're the ones that are more likely to have the spontaneous awakening. It's still on the rare side. It can still happen. As I said, it can happen at birth if I have a case of a person actually, a brick fell on his head. Okay, but these are rare and unusual. There isn't a regular basis in the level I'm talking about for the Kundalini, let's say spontaneously awaken with yoga asana practices and pranayama. You can raise the energy. Absolutely. You do yoga asana, raise the energy. I do pranayama every day. My wife and I do it together. It raises the energy. It's good, but we're not talking that. Kundalini awakens very, very different. It takes you, as Carl Jung said, into a universe out of your control. It takes you to a place of awakening that's beyond the imagination. So activating your energy through pranayama, which is a little bit more classical way with that. These mechanical ways can certainly heat you up. They can certainly, move the energy, but we are not talking about Kundalini awakening. This is really not the same. Can it happen? Yeah. Again, my experience over the years, and that's 45 years of doing this, is really it's the people doing intense hours of meditation, 4 to 6 hours a day of meditation that I see that more spontaneous awakening. So that's what I want to say. Now, I don't want to discourage anybody because I think it's great that you're doing these things and it's good. And that desire is really, really important in the process. But generally speaking, the classic, easiest and safest, I want to use the word safest, is getting the classical Shaktipat. Now, do you have to have a relationship with the teacher? Well, no, that may sound, it's not good for the guru business, right? But the truth is, the answer is no. I barely knew Muktananda. He just said, come, okay? I've given Shaktipat to as many as 4,000 people at once, and once in Brazil, and all kinds of people I never met. They had lots of, classic Kundalini awakening, okay? I don't know anybody. I'm just this energy conduit that has been given task by my guru to do the work. I have to show up and do the work. And so do you follow what I'm saying? But I don't have to know people. So when I do a meditation, Shaktipat meditation, people are welcome. And I do come about twice a year to the Bay Area because I have my son and my granddaughter there and so forth, Petaluma. But there's no prerequisite. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. And I guess I'm curious for people who've come to those events, is it a guarantee that they're going to feel something? For example, when you had this experience in a room with 1,000 people, when you had your transmission, were the people on the left and right of you experiencing something similar or the exact same thing? Or is everyone going to experience this differently? Or if the teacher, is initiating to a large group of people, is it sort of like only the people in the group who are ready for the awakening will experience it?
It's an excellent question. In my experience over the years, it's only the people who are ready, okay? Let's say, I'll put it this way. Let's say you need 8 units to have the awakening of the Kundalini to go to 10 units. Well, if you're at 6, well, you need to be doing your pranayama and your meditating and your yoga asana and things, and you're building up that understanding. So it's only when you're at 8 units, let's say, are you ready to have it awaken? So there are many people who don't have it awaken. That's what it is. But every time you go, you're increasing your energy for that potential to happen.
And that's great, because that makes sense for those of us that are practicing at home, that we're laying that foundation. We're, adding up the units to experience this eventually.
Right. So the key is, and this is what I really share with people, enjoy what you're doing. Don't have a goal. Classic kind of karma yoga, action without expectation of return. Just enjoy it. Love the lifestyle. And when it's ready, you'll be guided to the right situation for that to awaken.
Well, I love that you use the word goal, because in speaking with you, I've been thinking about the Yoga Sutras a little bit, and Patanjali talking about how kind of the goal or aim of yoga, right, is to reach this state of samadhi. Now, I don't know if I'm mixing philosophies here, but I think people are often curious about this. Like, is a state of samadhi, like to get to a state of samadhi, is a Kundalini awakening required, or are these two completely separate things?
Well, it's a question I can't fully answer, but yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is quieting the activities of the mind, right? That's what Patanjali said. Now, I think the key is when you quiet your mind, who knows what's going to happen next, but samadhi is there, and I don't think your Kundalini has to be awakened for that. That's my impression. Now, the states of samadhi I'm talking about is beyond a quiet mind. Because Patanjali in that sutra isn't talking about going beyond the mind. That's still within the mind. Am I being clear what I'm saying here?
No, this is really interesting. Samadhi is that quieting of the mind. It's not.
He's saying yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The goal of yoga is to quiet the mind. That's goal one. The next part of it is to go beyond the mind. That's where what I talk about samadhi is happening. And there's two kinds of samadhis, sankalpa samadhi and nirakalpa samadhi. And what does that mean? Sankalpa is when you merge into the white light and you disappear. Okay, you're gone. Well, there's a little idea of the I amness left, but and nirvikalpa is when you merge into the void. Okay, so I'm giving you two, and it's the blackness. So those are two levels. They kind of happen beyond the mind because there's really no you left. And the you I'm talking about is the individual identity of yourself, your own unique I amness. That's still the mind. Okay. So let me give you an example of fairly extreme nirvikalpa samadhi. So I'm meditating in India, and this energy kind of overtakes me. And this is way after the Kundalini is awakened. And I not only merge into the void, that's step one, but I disappear. Not only do I disappear, I stop breathing. And how do I know? Because my wife came in and noticed she thought I died. Okay, but she wouldn't let anybody touch me because she also had an idea, well, he was doing it when he was meditating, who knows? So I am gone for 40 minutes. I'm not breathing in a visible way for 40 minutes, and then I come out of the nothing. So the deeper samadhi is there's no you. So I'm giving a little bit deeper understanding of these things, which is way different than a quiet mind where you're aware of a quiet mind, which is the yoga chitta vritti nirodha, step one. You follow what I'm saying here? And same with sankalpa samadhi, you're merging into the white light. Nirvikalpa is deeper. And you disappear into it. That's beyond the mind. And so I'm defining it a little bit deeper into that. And there's another samadhi, which is the enlightenment samadhi, which is sahaja samadhi, which is you're walking around with that awareness all the time. And that's more the enlightenment state where that exists within you, and you are aware, and you're aware of nothing. So you're still beyond the mind, even though you're in the body. Sounds paradoxical, but the enlightenment path, liberation path is paradoxical in a certain way. So there are three levels, but sahaja samadhi is like the samadhi while walking around. It's another state. But I want just to give you, just so we're full in this discussion. So we have sankalpa samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, which are your classical kind of samadhis, but I'm saying they're beyond the quiet mind because you disappear. You die into the nothing. And that's a kind of, I think, a little clear. I hope that's a clearer explanation for what I believe he was talking about. And I believe he knew those states, but he was perhaps talking about the first step when he said yoga churti vrti nirodha. I mean, Patanjali, as far as I can tell, was a really great enlightened being.
Sivana family, make sure to tune in on Thursday, where this conversation with Gabriel Cousens will continue. We have so much more to discuss. We'll be talking about how once you experience a Kundalini awakening, how it actually unfolds throughout your system and through the higher chakras. We're going to learn about how this energy can thrive or die depending on how we choose to nurture it. And we're also going to deep dive into the relationship between teacher and student. Is it possible to experience a Kundalini awakening without the guidance of a spiritual teacher? Or is energy transmission from a teacher really necessary? And what are the red flags that we should be aware of when looking to receive Shaktipat? How do we find the right teacher? All of that is coming up when this conversation is continued on Thursday. Make sure to tune in then. For now, from my heart to yours, thank you for being here, for listening, and namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at SivanaEast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Sivana podcast.
It is a spiritual marriage. Now, what's a spiritual marriage mean? Again, this has nothing to do with sex. It is a commitment between you and the teacher to work as intensely as possible for your liberation. That's the marriage vow. So there has to be someone who's willing to go there with you, even if it's, they say, kind of distant in a way, but they're there, they're committed, and they're going to do what's needed for your awakening. That's their commitment, and your commitment is to do whatever you need to do for that awakening, using the teacher as a guide.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Sivana family. Welcome back to the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And this episode is a continuation. It's part 2 of our fascinating conversation about Shaktipat and Kundalini awakening. So if you haven't listened to Tuesday's episode, the episode right before this one, make sure to do that. We talk about what Shaktipat is, what role does it play in the process of liberation, how is it that it's transmitted down from student to teacher. And in this episode, we're going deeper. We're going to discuss, once you experience a Kundalini awakening, how does that actually unfold throughout your system and the upper chakras. We're going to learn about how this Kundalini energy can thrive or die, depending on how we choose to nurture it. We're also going to deep dive and discuss the relationship between teacher and student. Is it possible to experience a Kundalini awakening without the guidance of a spiritual teacher, or is direct energy transmission from a teacher really necessary? What red flags should we be aware of when we're looking for this teacher, when we're looking to receive Shaktipat? Here to talk to us about all of these things today is Gabriel Cousens. He's the author of 14 internationally acclaimed books. He's known worldwide as a spiritual teacher and the leading expert in live plant source nutrition. He's a holistic physician, a psychiatrist, a family therapist. He holds an MD from Columbia Medical School, a doctorate in homeopathy, and diplomas in Ayurveda, clinical acupuncture, and holistic medicine. His knowledge on all things Kundalini is vast, so buckle up as we continue Tuesday's conversation. Before we jump back into the conversation, I just want to remind you that the best way to keep these interviews coming to you and to support the podcast is by making a purchase on savanaspirit.com. And you can use that code podcast30 for 30% off your first order. The product I'm featuring and highlighting today is the Sivana Spirit prayer wheels. This concept of a prayer wheel was inspired by the method of Buddha's teaching, turning the wheel of Dharma. And Dharma in Buddhism means law and order. In other words, the laws of the universe. These prayer wheels are found throughout Tibetan culture, and it's believed that as the wheel is spun, the practitioner is gaining wisdom and destroying negative karma, thereby progressing along their spiritual path. So if that's something you're interested or want to explore bringing into your home practice, explore Sivana Spirit's prayer wheels, and remember there are so many amazing products designed to help your yoga and meditation practice at savanaspirit.com, and you're going to want to use that code podcast30 for 30% off your first order. All right, now let's get back into our conversation with Gabriel. So again, forgive me if I'm getting too technical, but does that mean that in order to get to these 3 elevated states of samadhi, that a Kundalini awakening is required?
Well, I'll never want to say required because you never know what's going on, okay? But what I'd say is it's pretty common that prior to that, because this is like 2 years later, 3 years later after the awakening, as it progresses within you, that these things for me begin to happen, besides the initial Shaktipat. And in that, I got my assignment, which is you should learn to eat and live in a way that supports the Kundalini awakening. That's how I got into spiritual nutrition. From that assignment on that, the voice rang out. So I was getting messages. I was going to nothing. I was having visions. I was having a lot of things going on. But generally speaking, at the level of samadhi I'm talking about, I've only heard about that from people who already have the Kundalini awaken. So I'll say that. And I see in the Kundalini Crisis Clinic, I'll see Buddhists and I'll see, Zen meditators, because it's not exactly written in their system that this is supposed to happen. Then they start having kriyas where they're moving around and the master's sitting over your head because, you're moving around. You're supposed to be sitting still, but the energy's moving. And I want to emphasize the idea of the energy moving because it's unwinding you so the Kundalini can best flow. That's where you got the yoga asanas, that's where you get the pranayama, because it begins reorganizing you on the physical and emotional and mental and also cellular level so this Kundalini energy can do its job of taking you to liberation. So we kind of see it that way. So what I'm saying is more in my 45 years of experience with this, it's like, yeah, I think it does to go to these deeper levels of samadhi. Can you get a quiet mind mending? Of course, but I'm not calling that samadhi because there's still you and noticing you have a quiet mind. Does that kind of help answer that?
It does. And I think my next question, or what I'd love to hear you talk about, is we're talking about Kundalini awakening. And I think people have this visual of, right, that serpentine energy moving up the spine and through the chakras. And in the case that you've shared, right, this is a huge awakening with actual physical, stigmata, right? What happens after that? Does the Kundalini recoil and go back to, live and habitate at the base of the spine so you can go make breakfast and do all the other things you need to do? Or once it's awakened forever and that's how you're passing it to other people?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'm going to answer it again based on my experience is, okay, for the first 3 days after this, I could barely move. It was very intense, okay? Then things start to come into integration, but it's just started its work. So it begins to progress throughout your system. So as I write in my book on the spiritual nutrition, I talk about how you have 3 knots, and one is kind of near the base, but it's more I'm going to say sexual knot, and there's certain things that happen there. Now, how do I know? Because it happened to me, okay? And then there's a heart knot, And again, I'm not using the technical terms here. And then finally, there's a third eye knot. Now, each of those requires another level of the Kundalini. So you have prana, and then they call it chit, which is more heart, another level of intensity, and Kundalini. Okay, so those are the three levels. And then above that third eye, then there's a whole other thing that happens. So it's a constant unfolding. And the idea of feeding the Kundalini is living in a way that supports it. In yoga terms, we call it Sanatana Dharma, the natural way of living that takes you to liberation. So, for me, that includes yogasana, includes pranayama, it includes yogasana, of course. It also includes service and charity, and also includes generally working with a spiritual teacher and doing vairagya and viveka. Are you familiar with the word vairagya?
I am, yes, but please define it and tell our listeners just in case they don't know.
So vairagya is what we call equal vision. It's seeing the spark of the divine in everyone, that we're all equal souls. We may have different levels of responsibility, but in the inner world, we're all equal souls. And viveka is the ability to tell the difference between the temporal reality and the cosmic reality, and be able to balance those in your life. So that's what goes on. Then another step is, prayer and meditation, and also mantra repetition, and then as much Shaktipat as possible. So all these things build and move the energy. So it has to be fed. I've had people come to me and they had Kundalini awakened like 30 years ago, but they didn't do the work and they were in great regret. And so they come to meditation and, it will get reactivated. Now, was it just lighten or did it go to sleep? I can't make that judgment. But generally speaking, once it's awakened, it keeps moving if you're doing what I just mentioned. I call it the 6 foundations, that you're in Sanatana Dharma, that continues to have that unfoldment for yourself. Okay. You're continually, upping the energy, helping unfold, because really a lot of things go on. You burn up a lot of samskaras, almost initially, because it's moving up the Sushumna, where the samskaras, at least in my yoga tradition, have it stored. You're straightening things out actually on your physical body. It actually is a great upgrade that way. And then you face more and more spiritual kind of unfolding and tests. So it's working physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual plane continually, but you have to be in Sanatana Dharma. I don't want to say you have to, but if you're in Sanatana Dharma, then you're going to be optimally feeding it on all the levels. And that's the way I would say it. So it can't just run, okay, I'm going to get Shaktipat today and that's it. No, you have to really, that's when the work begins.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like this flame that's awakened inside you, but it's like just like you tend to a fire, like you have to nurture it.
And you have to feed it. It has to, and all these practices, which include the pranayama, which include yogasana, but a lot more, I'm going to say more emphasis for me is with meditation. It drove me to have to meditate 6 hours a day. I didn't really have a choice. And I was chanting 4.5 hours. And I did this for 7 years until I was acknowledged. I wasn't going anywhere. And that's the point I want to say. Goal limits you because it's an ego thing. So for me, and I'm going to say a little naive, but maybe that was good, I didn't have a goal. I get up at 2 a.m. every day and we do what we're doing and do my Shiva puja with the little Shiva temple, and I would do this, and then I go off meditating, then we'd be chanting for an hour and a half. And then I was just showing up, having the courage to show up as I was feeling it was pushing me to the limit, and I was just willing to stay with it the whole time. So there was no goal. It was, maybe just surviving it, but there's no, I'm going to do this so I'll be enlightened. It really honestly wasn't in my mind. It was, here's the process. Can I keep up with it?
Right. And the way you're describing it, it sounds like once you have a Kundalini awakening, it's almost like a full-time job to tend to it. And I mean, to do the amount of practice you're describing, Has that been your experience, or is this something that someone could continue to nurture? Say they have a Kundalini awakening, but they could continue to nurture and sort of tend to that flame as we're talking about it, and also, go to an office job or, be part of like...
Yeah, I mean, I was also working as a holistic physician. This is in India, but also here in the U.S., back and forth, about 4.5 hours a day. So it didn't incapacitate me in any, for the first few days, yes. But besides the first few days, no. Because you just become part of the cosmic flow, everything gets easier to do. You're doing your work, whatever it is. To me, as a holistic physician, fine, I'm doing that. Fine, I'm dealing with people having Kundalini crisis. Fine. You're just part of the flow. So you become more effective. You don't become, unless you have some real mental problem with it, you really don't become dysfunctional. It's just the opposite. You become more functional.
And do you still, in your experience, it requires practicing a long amount of time a day? Like you said, you were sort of driven to chant and driven to do these things, or can it be a short, effective practice? Like, what does your practice look like right now? Your personal practice?
Well, let me ask the question, then so it's going to move you at different times. Then it was 6 hours of meditation, 4.5 hours of chanting, also householder. So, I have my kids, time for relationship, also working 4.5 hours as a, holistic physician. You had to be pretty well organized to pull that off. So it doesn't take you away from your life. It deepens your life. So I was on the intense path. Maybe that's my style. Whatever it is, that's what was happening. You can also have a moderate or mild path where it's there and you're doing your yogasana hour a day or whatever you're doing. And you know what I mean? You're doing your service in different ways. So people have different paths according to their destiny. I'm going to put it that way. I just knew it was my destiny. I had to be doing that, period. And if you aren't driven that way, that's fine. It's still unfolding, and everybody has their time. So it's not like you can technique your way to enlightenment. And maybe that helps here. Sanatana Dharma is just being lived by the Kundalini, being lived by the natural way of living that takes you to liberation, and it guides you. So that's what I'm saying. There isn't exactly a rule book on this. You have to follow how your inner guidance is. So for some people, they're going to do, an hour of meditation a day, and they're going to be doing this, and we'll do some yoga. I'm working an office job. I have my family. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's going to vary according to the person and according to, I'm going to say, your destiny. Okay. And I wasn't thinking about destiny. Honestly, I was just trying to keep up with this divine energy unfolding. I clearly knew it was a divine energy. My job, as I framed it, was, let me see if I can keep up with this. Does that make sense, what I just said?
It does. And Gabriel, I'd love to hear you tell us about finding the right teacher, because when we look at yoga as a whole right now, in America at least, people go to a studio and they may or may not practice with a particular teacher that they have a close relationship with. They may be intimidated to even connect on a deeper level with a teacher. We're kind of all just practicing on our mats together, but there's not that. And again, I don't want to say it's like it has to be an intimate connection, because as you said, like you were in a room with 1,000 people and your teacher gave you this transmission. But what advice do you have?
And I hadn't even hardly met him.
Yeah, exactly. So what advice do you have for people? Or I guess the question is really like, do you think in order to have an awakening or in order to progress the way we need to progress, does there need to be a teacher who helps us? Like, can we do this on our own? Do we need a teacher? And if so, how do we find the right person?
Okay, so my first answer is I think everyone ultimately needs a teacher at a certain time in their evolution, because it not only does it make it easier, but there's certain things like getting Shaktipat, like being somewhat directed, helps a tremendous amount. I can talk from my experiences is that this was really beyond my background, so to speak. So having a teacher guide and listen and point out areas of unfoldment, even though I actually didn't have that a real personal relationship, but still, I would listen to them every day, and I would sit in, silence with them. So the role of a teacher is very, very important on that general energetic level. Now, in the enlightenment thing, and I'm going to, that's a whole other level. So having an enlightened teacher, if that's what your point is, clearly you need that. So when you say, well, what's the criteria? Well, you need somebody who's I can use the word acknowledged, liberated. That's very specific. In other words, I've been acknowledged by 2 different gurus who were liberated. Fine, and I picked someone because I knew in my heart there was something about that who had been acknowledged by his guru as liberated. You see what I'm saying here? So it just depends what you want. Now, if you want a yoga asana teacher, then you want your best teacher. But if you're talking about liberation, you're talking about a different set of criteria. So because you can teach yoga asana, has nothing to do with liberation, if that makes sense. If we're looking for liberation, then you need to find someone who is there, who's acknowledged, and then knows all the potholes along the way. Without creating any fear about it, there are many dead bodies along the way, because you can, when you're dealing at this level, you really can get off and really get confused and really damage your spiritual life. So having someone to guide you is very important. You have to do the work. They don't do the work for you. In our tradition, there is another step to this, and that will partly answer your question. There is a step once we go to Kundalini from the third eye. Once that's open, there's a final step which does require the role of the spiritual teacher, which is to pull the energy from there up through the crown. Okay. And I was at this place where there's another kind of a chakra in between called Akata triangle. And I was having visions of Kameshwara and Kameshwara in this triangle. And when you hit that, then you're tasting the golden nectar. All this is going on. I know more is going on. And I'm not, say that, on a talking real relationship with Muktananda at all. And I'm thinking, well, how is this going to happen? So I'm in my usual 2-hour noon meditation where we live. And suddenly I got a message, go to this particular place, which is a little indoor courtyard outside of Muktananda's room. Okay, I don't know. I'm going to do that. And I go there, I sit down, and he comes out of his door, comes over to me and begins moving the energy from above the third eye up through this final phase of the Kundalini. And once it pops, which is needed for liberation, he just turns around and goes away. Well, he doesn't say anything to me, but clearly he did the last step. Now, I didn't ask. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there's a role there that the enlightened spiritual teacher can play that's way beyond giving you some knowledge. And the teacher does help you give, obviously get knowledge. And you study the Vedas, you study this, gives you different insights, helps you for Reiki and Vivekya and all those subtleties, because they can kind of look behind you metaphorically and let you know where your holes are, where you need to work on yourself, because you don't see those holes. Nobody does. So there is a role for that level of teacher, but there's a role for the teacher in the enlightenment process where the final kind of step happens. Now, are there exceptions? Yes, there are. But generally speaking, now I'm giving you a kind of classic understanding of it and my own direct experience. Does that help? Now I'm going to just say that's not the same as learning yoga asana. Well, you do need a teacher for that too. I mean, it's like, well, you want to learn to play the piano? Well, you can figure it out on your own, or you can have an expert teacher, and that speeds up the process. So there isn't, to me, in my opinion, there is a role for teachers at all the different levels.
What advice do you have for people who are interested in the kind of teacher we're talking about today? Maybe they have a very strong yoga asana and meditation practice, and they're excited about all of this. They're ready for the next step, but they don't know where to turn. Should they be maybe setting an intention, or kind of what advice do you have for them to get connected to the right person?
What I would say, because there has to be some kind of chemistry there, okay? I had been actually looking for a teacher over a period of time, just because I knew that was important in my own kind of intuition. And you go to this one, no, he's not liberated. And you go to this one, and no, that person, she isn't really ready, to do do you see what I mean? So you have to do some shopping. Then there has to be a certain amount of chemistry. Now, I don't mean sexual chemistry, all that gets mixed up. I'm not talking about that. But it is a spiritual marriage. Now, what's a spiritual marriage mean? Again, this has nothing to do with sex. It is a commitment between you and the teacher to work as intensely as possible for your liberation. That's the marriage vow. So there has to be someone who's willing to go there with you, even if it's, they say, kind of distant and away, but they're there, they're committed, and they're going to do what's needed for your awakening. That's their commitment. And your commitment is to do whatever you need to do for that awakening, using the teacher as a guide. So those are your kind of the spiritual marriage in terms of the liberation process. Is that different than going to someone learning yoga? So, yeah, it is, because people have their styles. And hey, does this fit? Do I like this style? Do I like the flowing thing like my wife and I now do? Because she became my yoga teacher. The tri-yoga system, that works for me. It's flowing and it organizes the neurology and it does a lot of things. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's more individual. Other people like this style. People like this style. In the same way, when you're talking about a spiritual teacher involved in the liberation process, got to have the chemistry, and it has to fit in some way. You have to feel comfortable with your teacher.
Are there any red flags that you think people should look out for? For example, you talked a little bit about how this is not a sexual relationship. Are there things like that, whether it's payment or saying that there's going to be some sort of transmission through sex, that are these things could you tell us basically some red flags that we should look out for?
I may be a little traditional, but to me, that really, the whole sexual thing is really out of line. And there are a lot of reasons why that's out of line. But I would say if that's going on, that's a huge red flag. Any sort of exploitation, sexual being one of them, is, takes it out of line. So there has to be a contract where you're doing what you're doing. Yeah, okay, so there's some payment. You got to pay to go to an intensive. You see what I mean? But that's kind of in a conscious contract. We're not talking about exploitation. Should it be for free? Well, I don't think traditionally it's for free. You go to the guru traditionally and you work 12 years, well, that your labor counts. That wasn't for free, even though you didn't pass money. So there has to be some sort of energy exchange. It's kind of the rules of the universe, so to speak, in my point of view. It doesn't have to be money, but there has to be an exchange of energy. I think that's part of how the overall system, and I'm not just talking about guru-disciple, but in general in the world, how that works. So I'll put it that way. And crossing the boundaries, like the sexual thing, really is a super red flag. Exploitation, where you're feeling exploited in an obvious way, that's a red flag. That's how I would look at it. You want the chemistry, which is a positive psychospiritual chemistry, and again, not sexual chemistry, and some level of commitment.
And in terms of the level of commitment, and if someone was interested in approaching a teacher about having this kind of relationship, do you have any? I don't know. It's interesting because it seems like such a personal relationship, right? You're calling it a spiritual marriage. Yet at the same time, your experiences was that there were 1,000 other people around you when this was happening, right? So,
and it was intensely personal. How many people do you know come up and blow into your mouth and you're taking on their energy? I mean, that's pretty personal. Do you follow me? I was willing to take his, we'll say Shakti into myself and let it work on me. Takes a lot of trust, and again, it's very personal. Okay, did I spend time talking with it? Not really. I wasn't a Swami, and the Swamis had a little bit more priority. I was a householder and am a householder. But I was allowed to stand, in the line with the Swamis near him when he was doing darshan. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, it sounds like you really trusted him, and that element of trust would be very important for any of this to unfold correctly.
That's a nice way of phrasing it. There has to be that trust. I didn't think about it that way, honestly. I was there, but that trust is inherent. So there has to be some real trust in the relationship. To me, the spiritual marriage is the trust that they are really committed to your liberation. Okay, not everybody's committed. Not every teacher's committed to your personal liberation. But to me, that's part of the spiritual marriage. That's your marriage vow. So there has to be trust in those vows, whether you say it overtly or not.
That makes a lot of sense. Gabriel, as we wrap up our time together, I want to make sure people know. So how can they get connected and find you, whether it's online, or what's the best way if they want to connect with you more around what we've talked about here today?
Well, they can go to drcousens.com. That's my website. Teaching in different places around the country. I do teach in the Bay Area twice a year. And once they get hooked in, there's a schedule. I'll be in New York. I'll be in Florida. I'm trying to limit it to like 4 places here. I'm in Brazil. I'm in Europe. I'm in Israel. I'm in a variety of places. So once they're hooked into the schedule, this is what people do. Okay. And they'll come to some point, particularly when they know I'm giving Shaktipat, and, make that connection. That's how I would say that's the most real way. There needs to be some in-person connection at some point in the story. Even if it's once, it does make a difference. So go to drcousens.com, look up the schedule, see where there's a potential interface. Because a lot of people come and they just want to get that Shakti and Shaktipat, and that's fine. And then they continue. I don't do like a list of disciples, and that's not the way I do it. It's just like, I'm there. This is what I'm supposed to do, and you're welcome to come drink at the fountain.
I'll make sure to put all those links below so people can find you. And I just want to follow up on something you said that I thought was interesting, was that coming in person is important, because I know you said before that this can be transmitted with like a look or a gaze, right? And when we were talking about like red flags, would that be another red flag for people if someone was like, we can just do this over Skype? Like, is that, do you know what I'm saying? Like through video conference, is that?
Okay, so I give you an example how it works. So in a week or two, I'm going to Brazil. Now, their groups, because my students are there, I will give their group Shaktipat. They will get Kundalini, but they're also going to meet with me. You see what I mean? I'm and that's part of it. So, but we don't want to limit it to a Skype interaction, although we can do those things. There needs to be this personal connection at some level. Now, that's just my belief system, okay? You can have gurus who have left their body and they're still carrying a certain amount of connection energy. So I don't want to limit it, but I believe there's some power to the living in-person spiritual teacher that's different than your fantasy of someone who's left the body, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we close, is there any last words of advice that you have for our listeners who are hoping to awaken Kundalini energy in their body and start walking towards this path of liberation?
I think the most important advice I can give to have that really heartfelt commitment to participate in the liberation process, beginning the process of, I'm going to say, Sanatana Dharma, the natural way of living that leads you to liberation, and somewhere along the line, finding a teacher, even if it's for one time, where this energy can be awakened.
And when you say a heartfelt commitment, just because I want to really drill down for folks, does that look like a daily yoga practice, a daily meditation practice, maybe a certain type of diet? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, that's certainly the kind of foundation level. I mean, if you're not doing yoga sun every day and you're not really meditating and you're not doing the pranayama, for me, in terms of eating, it really needs to be an ahimsa diet, which is at least a vegan diet. Those are like foundations. The yogic teachings really don't support eating death. Lots and lots of quotes. So it is a commitment to be live a sattvic lifestyle, which is, again, takes you away from eating meat, fish, chicken, and dairy. So even though in the past dairy was part of the sattvic lifestyle, it's not the same. That takes us to another discussion. But it's a whole lifestyle. The Sanatana Dharma is the lifestyle that supports you becoming a superconductor of the divine. put it that way. And so may everyone be blessed that you have the courage to make that choice in your life to move into Sanatana Dharma and move towards being a superconductor of the divine and meet awakened spiritual teacher or liberated spiritual teacher who can activate the Kundalini within you so that you can go ever deeper into the truth of who you are.
Gabriel, thank you so much. That's such a great note to end on. I so appreciate you coming on the show. Sivana listeners, let me know what you thought of this week's episode. Thank you as always for your encouragement, for your feedback. And remember that nothing means more to me and supports the show than a review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. So a review is really the easiest way to give back, and also let me know the topics and the speakers that you care most about. My goal, as always, is to make this podcast everything you want it to be. Thrilled to be on this journey together. Thank you so much for being here. From Gabriel and I, from our hearts to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at SivanaEast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Sivana podcast.